My name is Emily Gonzalez. I'm 39 years old, and 1 week ago, the man I spent more than a decade loving told me that I had been holding him back. It was said with a calmness so casual that it almost felt rehearsed, as if he had been practicing the line for months. But to understand how everything spiraled into a breakup, lawyers, and an invoice worth nearly $100,000, you need to know the part of the story that came first, the part where I believed that supporting someone meant giving them every resource you had without asking them for anything in return. 2 years ago, my boyfriend Anthony Rivera decided he wanted to open his own boutique clothing store. He had been working part-time as a buyer for a department store. The job was fine, nothing glamorous, but stable. Still, Anthony wanted more. He wanted something that felt personal and meaningful. This store will be my legacy, he told me. Something that finally feels like mine. I supported him completely. That wasn't a difficult decision. When you're in love, it feels natural to root for the other person's dreams, even when the numbers on the spreadsheet make your stomach tighten. He calculated that he needed about $75,000 to get everything started, first-year lease and deposit, inventory, renovations, marketing, licensing. We sat at the kitchen table, night after night, going through every line item. I had around $40,000 saved for a future down payment on a bigger home. I suggested applying for a small business loan for the rest. Anthony immediately rejected the idea, saying debt would limit his creativity and make him too anxious to think straight. I didn't want him drowning in anxiety, so I convinced myself that I could shoulder the burden instead. I liquidated some investments, accepted the penalty for pulling from my retirement account, borrowed $15,000 from my parents, and pieced together enough to help him open the store in March. It should have been exciting, and at first it was. But by June, he needed an additional $12,000 for unexpected inventory issues. I took on a consulting side job on weekends to help cover it and paid my parents back slowly, month after month. But the store never found its footing. Anthony blamed the location, the one he insisted was perfect, then the economy, then the customers, then society at large for not valuing craftsmanship. And somehow, gradually, without me even realizing it, the frustrations he had with the store began turning into frustrations he had with me. If I suggested a pricing adjustment or a promotional sale, he accused me of trying to control his business. If I didn't say anything at all, he accused me of being emotionally absent and unsupportive. It didn't matter what I did. I was always the problem. By last September, the store had bled itself dry. Anthony closed it permanently. It was a complete and painful financial loss, but I never said I told you so. I tried to be the calm one, the steady one. I told him we would rebuild. I told him he wasn't a failure. I told him dreams don't always succeed the first time. Last week, he came home late from dinner with friends. He seemed strange, quiet, almost rehearsed. When I asked if everything was okay, he snapped, "No, Emily, it's not okay. I'm suffocating in this relationship." I genuinely thought I misheard him. But he kept going, telling me I never believed in him, that I threw money at his dream because it was easier than being emotionally supportive, that I secretly wanted him to fail to boost my own sense of control. It was so absurd that for a moment I could only stare at him. Then he said he wanted space. He wanted a separation. He needed to find himself, and somehow I had become the obstacle. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I simply said, "You're right. I should step aside." He looked surprised that I didn't fight him. 2 days later, he moved in with his sister and handed me the name of his lawyer, clearly prepared for a drawn-out confrontation. The morning after he left, I sat at my dining table and felt the grief collapse into something sharper. I opened my computer, pulled bank statements, created spreadsheets, and totaled everything I had given him. $87, $340 in total, not including the loss of retirement growth or the penalties I had paid. Then I calculated 5% annual interest, a conservative rate for a business loan. The final number came to $94,683. I drafted a formal invoice. I itemized every contribution. I attached receipts, bank transfers, screenshots of texts. My paralegal friend helped me format it into something that looked like it came from a corporate accounting department. Then I sent it to Anthony and his lawyer with the subject line, "Outstanding business investment repayment required." 30 minutes later, Anthony's lawyer emailed back asking if I was serious. I replied, "Absolutely serious." By the next day, the situation had already escalated. His lawyer claimed the funds were gifts between romantic partners, accused me of being vindictive and cruel, and insisted the invoice was unenforceable. What Anthony and his lawyer didn't realize was that I had kept every text message. For 2 years, he had asked for money while using the words, "loan investment, and I'll pay you back countless times." And that was when I felt the shift, the moment when heartbreak turned into clarity. I realized I wasn't the villain in his story. I was just the first person to hold him accountable. The morning after I sent the invoice, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from Anthony's family, messages from mutual friends, emails from his lawyer. It was as if all of them had rehearsed the same chorus. How could you do this to him? How could you demand repayment after everything he's been through? Not one of them asked what I had been through or what I had sacrificed. To them, Anthony was the wounded artist whose spirit had been crushed by my cold financial retaliation, as if I hadn't spent years giving him every ounce of stability I had. His lawyer's official response arrived that afternoon. The letter was 2 pages long and written in the most condescending tone imaginable, describing my invoice as vindictive, emotionally charged, and legally unenforceable. According to him, everything I contributed had been a gift given freely within a committed relationship, and my request for repayment was an attempt to financially abuse a vulnerable client during a difficult emotional period. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. I forwarded the email to my lawyer the best I could afford on short notice and waited. She didn't take long. "We need evidence. These were loans, not gifts," she said. "Anything written, anything that mentions repayment." I nearly laughed. Evidence. I had so much evidence it bordered on embarrassing. I opened a folder I'd created and dragged in dozens of screenshots, messages with timestamps, bank transfers with captions from Anthony, even voice memos where he apologized for asking for another loan. My lawyer's tone shifted the moment she read them. These aren't vague promises. He uses the word loan explicitly, repeatedly. This is extremely helpful. She sent a reply to Anthony's lawyer within an hour. It was short, sharp, and laced with steel. "Please provide evidence that the funds were gifted. Our client maintains that all contributions were loans or business investments, as contemporaneous written communications clearly indicate. Attached are 27 such communications." That was the first crack in Anthony's side. Later that evening, while gathering documents for my lawyer, I found something else, something I hadn't been looking for. The business account was in Anthony's name, only something he insisted on early on, so that he could maintain complete creative control. Even though I funded nearly everything, he was the sole owner of the business entity. He said it kept things clean, legally speaking. I had access only because the paper statements had been mailed to our house. When I opened the box, I expected to see the usual expenses inventory orders, vendor payments, marketing fees. I was prepared for financial chaos, but not for what I actually saw. Right there, highlighted in the monthly summaries, were over $23,000 in business expenses that had nothing to do with the store. Charges from a spa. I had never heard of restaurants. He never took me to a hotel. I knew we had never stayed in thousands in cash. Withdrawals, jewelry stores, and charges at boutiques I didn't recognize. Every line item felt heavier than the last. These weren't mistakes or miscalculations. They were decisions, intentional ones, and all of them made behind my back with money I'd pulled from my future. I forwarded the questionable expenses to my lawyer without comment. Her reply came minutes later. "Oh, this is very relevant, especially if he claims financial hardship or emotional distress." That was the moment something in me solidified. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped. I wasn't going to be shamed, and I certainly wasn't going to let him get away with rewriting the story to make himself a victim. Not long after the phone calls started, first Anthony's sister. "How dare you bill him like some creditor," she snapped. "He pursued his dreams. You should be proud, not cruel." I told her that Anthony had repeatedly called the money a loan and promised repayment once the store succeeded. She told me that was semantics, that couples didn't nitpick money like that. When I reminded her I'd taken a retirement penalty and borrowed from my parents, she simply said, "Well, that was your choice," and hung up. Then his mother called, sobbing so loudly I could barely understand her. She said Anthony was devastated, depressed, emotionally crushed. She said I was ruining him financially when he was already at his lowest. I reminded her it was Anthony who asked for the separation. Her response was, "He only did that because he felt unsupported." You pushed him to the edge. I ended the call before the conversation could get uglier. Even my own parents called. My dad was careful, trying to understand the situation, but my mom was emotional. Honey, we gave you that $15,000 because we believed in both of you. We didn't want it back. I explained that I wasn't asking for it back from them. I was asking Anthony to repay me so I could repay them. This is going to get messy, my mother warned. It already is, I said. The next day, a mutual friend reached out. He wanted to check in, but it quickly became clear he was calling on Anthony's behalf. He's really upset, the friend said. He told us you're trying to bankrupt him. I asked if Anthony also mentioned the $87,000 I gave him. Silence. Then the friend muttered, well, he said you were supposed to be partners, that you handled the finances together. I exhaled slowly, holding back anger. I funded 100% of the business, I said. He kept 100% of the control, and now 100% of it is gone. How is that a partnership? The friend didn't have an answer. The legal back and forth intensified quickly. Anthony's lawyer attempted to negotiate a reasonable compromise repayment of $80,000 with zero interest, spread out over a laughable $500 per month, which would take more than 13 years to complete. My lawyer rejected the offer in less than 5 minutes and added a line Anthony's attorney clearly didn't expect. We are fully prepared to proceed with discovery regarding misappropriated business funds. That was the moment everything changed. Anthony's side had no idea we'd already found the suspicious charges. They didn't know I had the account statements. They didn't know I had itemized every questionable expense. His lawyer went from aggressive to suddenly cautious. What none of them understood was that I had reached my breaking point. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the truth. For the first time in our entire relationship, I wasn't letting Anthony control the narrative. I wasn't cushioning his ego. I wasn't sacrificing myself so he could feel supported. I was standing my ground, and I was finally holding him accountable. And I could feel it even then. This fight was about to reveal far more than either of us expected. The moment Anthony's lawyer realized we weren't bluffing about the business expenses, everything shifted. His tone changed from dismissive to strangely formal, as if he finally understood this wasn't just an emotional breakup, this was a financial investigation with teeth. Within days, my lawyer filed a formal civil suit for repayment, which automatically triggered discovery, meaning both sides were legally required to hand over all documents related to the business. This was the part of the process Anthony clearly hadn't anticipated. Discovery meant full transparency. Receipts, bank statements, credit card charges, vendor records, everything. Anthony had never allowed me access to the business credit card. In the beginning, he'd said it was because he wanted to track everything himself and keep finances organized. Later, he insisted he needed complete control to stay focused creatively. I didn't push at the time. I thought it was just a quirk of being an entrepreneur. Now I understood it for what it really was, concealment. When the first batch of documents came in, my lawyer called me immediately. Emily, you need to come to the office. There's more than we expected. I drove there with a tightness in my chest, half furious, half afraid of what I would find. I braced myself for bad bookkeeping, maybe some foolish impulse buys he tried to pass off as business expenses. But as we spread the statements across the conference table, my stomach dropped. There were $34,000 in charges on the business credit card I had never seen before. While some were legitimate inventory shipping fabric orders, others were glaringly personal. Luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, jewelry stores, concert tickets, spa services, boutiques that specialized in women's clothing. I stared at the items in disbelief. He didn't even try to hide it, I whispered. He charged all of this to the business. My lawyer was calm but firm. Not only that, but the dates on these charges matter. Look here. She slid 2 statements toward me. These hotel stays happened on weekends. You told me you were working your second consulting job. Every single one. And this jewelry purchase, you said you've never seen it. I haven't, I said, voice tightening. He never gave me jewelry. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach. I remembered the restaurant bills we rarely matched to date nights. The mysterious cash withdrawals, the nights he came home late and insisted he'd been at networking events. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces I had tried so hard not to assemble locked into place, and someone else's outline, someone whose presence I had always felt but never identified, slowly sharpened. My lawyer cross-referenced the dates with my calendar exactly as the original story required. Each suspicious charge aligned perfectly with weekends I was gone or busy. Nothing lined up with our shared life. Every sign pointed to a pattern, and patterns don't lie. The next step was Anthony's deposition. This was separate from the civil suit, but happening in parallel because he had retained legal representation for our separation as well. I had never been in a deposition before. The room was sterile and cold, with a long table dividing the two sides. Anthony sat across from me, looking exhausted and irritated, but still holding that wounded artist demeanor he used whenever he felt scrutinized. His lawyer tried to appear confident, but I could tell from the stiffness in his jaw that he was uneasy. My lawyer began calmly. "Mr. Rivera, can you explain the charges at the Emerson Hotel on May 14th of last year?" Anthony cleared his throat. "That was a business networking event. Stayed overnight." She slid a printed statement toward him. "This shows room service for 2 champagne and a late checkout." "Who was the second guest?" He hesitated. "A colleague. Male or female?" His lawyer objected instantly, but the damage was already done. Anthony's face was a shade too red, his voice too unsteady. My lawyer didn't push the question, but she didn't need to. The insinuation was already hanging thick in the air. Next came the jewelry purchases. "Can you tell us the purpose of the $3,800 charge at Avellino Jewelers?" "It was a gift." "For whom?" "It doesn't matter," he snapped. "It was for business." "No one buys jewelry for business," my lawyer said, her voice cool and even. "Please answer the question." Anthony swallowed. "It was for a friend." "Not for me, not for anyone I knew. A friend." The judge overseeing the discovery process stepped in toward the end, reviewing the text where Anthony used words like loan, investment, repayment, and "I promise I'll return every penny." She lifted her eyes to Anthony and asked, "Did you intend to repay these funds?" He stammered, "I intended for the business to succeed, so we would both benefit." "That is not what I asked," the judge cut in. "Did you intend to repay her the money you requested?" His eyes started to water, not from heartbreak, but from the pressure of being cornered. His lawyer called for a recess. When they stepped outside, Anthony looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. During the break, my lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "They're going to settle. This is going very badly for them." She was right. When we resumed, Anthony's lawyer presented a newly softened tone and proposed a repayment plan. $45,000 over 5 years at $750 per month in exchange for dropping the interest and halting any further investigation into business expenses. My lawyer immediately countered $70,000 over 3 years, threatening full discovery of financial misappropriation if they refused. They tried to negotiate down, but the evidence was too damning. Eventually, they landed at $65,000 over 4 years, which my lawyer recommended I accept, but only if there was an automatic acceleration clause if he defaulted on even one payment. They reluctantly agreed. The settlement wasn't perfect. It didn't cover everything I had lost, but it was a victory, one grounded in reality and backed by the truth. I had protected myself not emotionally, but legally, and that mattered. But the most devastating twist hadn't surfaced yet. It came a week later from someone who never should have known the details, and yet somehow knew everything. A mutual friend. The one who said he probably shouldn't say anything. And with one sentence, he changed the whole story. Emily. Anthony was seeing someone. For a while. Long before the breakup. Everything inside me went still. For a long moment after hearing the words come out of our mutual friend's mouth, I couldn't react at all. It wasn't shock. Shock implies surprise. This felt more like confirmation, like a truth that had been sitting in my peripheral vision for months, waiting for me to finally look directly at it. "Who?" I asked quietly. He swallowed, clearly uncomfortable. "His ex. The woman who helped with the store's website. They reconnected. I guess sometime early last year." I didn't need a calendar to know what that meant. Early last year was exactly when the first suspicious credit card charges had appeared. The hotel weekends that didn't include me. The dinners I was never invited to. The jewelry I never saw. The boutique purchases that never made their way into our house. Every lie Anthony told suddenly had a timestamp, and every missing piece of the financial puzzle rearranged itself into a painfully coherent story. He had been using my money to romance another woman. My breath caught, but I didn't break. Maybe because part of me had expected this. Maybe because betrayal, when it finally arrives in full clarity, is almost too heavy to feel all at once. The friend kept rambling nervously, explaining that Anthony had been seen with her at events, that they had dinner together often, that he had overheard something about Anthony needing space long before Anthony ever said the words to my face. I listened, but my mind was already miles away. I remembered every moment Anthony claimed I was suffocating him, every accusation that I wasn't supportive enough, every time he'd looked at me like I had stolen something from him when in reality, he'd been stealing from me my savings, my trust, my dignity for months. Later that day, I sat down with my lawyer and told her everything. She listened carefully, her expression measured. When I finished, she said, "Legally, we can attempt to reopen discovery and pursue fraud, depending on how the misappropriated funds were presented during the settlement negotiations. But you need to understand this will be expensive, stressful, and could take months, even years." I knew she was right. I also knew that I had already lost enough time, money, and pieces of myself to Anthony's choices. The certainty of that decision washed over me like cold water. "No," I said. "I don't want to go after anything else. I'm done." Something shifted when I said those words out loud. It wasn't weakness, it was release. The separation agreement was finalized soon after. Even though we weren't married, years of shared finances, cohabitation, and commingled expenses meant the settlement process resembled a divorce in many ways. I lost some assets because of how the laws around long-term partnerships work. I ended up buying out our shared property interest at a painful cost. Anthony, in return, got certain items, portions of the savings account, and a few financial concessions my lawyer said were expected in cases like this. But the most important piece remained intact: the civil judgment for the $65,000 repayment over 4 years. No matter what else I lost, that obligation, the money he took from me and promised to repay, was secured. Still, even with the legal clarity, the emotional aftermath hit differently now that I knew about the affair. There was grief, yes, but not for Anthony. It was grief for myself, for the version of me who poured everything into a man who had already started checking out. For the woman who worked weekends to carry a business that was funding someone else's dinners. For the partner who bent over backwards trying to keep a relationship alive while he used my loyalty as a safety net for his betrayal. For days after the settlement, I went through the motions of daily life. I cooked because I had to. I worked because I needed to. I slept because exhaustion pulled me under every night. But emotionally, I felt detached from everything. I was navigating the world on autopilot, my mind still replaying every moment with Anthony through this new lens. It was a week later when one specific memory resurfaced, the night Anthony came home late after a networking event, smelling faintly of cologne he never wore. Back then, he brushed it off as someone hugging him goodbye. Now I realized that the woman wearing that scent wasn't a stranger. I didn't know her name, but I remembered feeling something uneasy that night, something I pushed away to avoid conflict. I had trusted him. He had relied on that trust. I asked my lawyer one last time whether pursuing fraud would change anything significant. She shook her head gently. "You've already secured the major victory. Even if you win a fraud case, it could cost you tens of thousands more in legal fees, and you might not recover much beyond what you already got. The process would be brutal." That was enough. I wasn't going to let Anthony keep draining me. The truth was already out. I didn't need a judge to confirm what everyone could see. Anthony had ruined his own credibility with his actions. He had sabotaged the business, the relationship, and his own future. The repayment plan was secured. The story was exposed. There was nothing left in him worth fighting for. A few days later, the mutual friend called again, not to gossip, but to apologize. He said I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I thought he was stressed, not cheating. If I'd known what he was doing with the money, I would have told you sooner. He paused, then added quietly, "He's moved in with her now, 2 weeks after the settlement." I should have felt anger, but I didn't. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. All I felt was confirmation. Anthony wasn't complicated. He wasn't searching for himself. He wasn't broken or misunderstood. He was simply someone who didn't value what he had, who used people until they ran dry, and who justified every selfish decision as a consequence of being unsupported. The truth had cost me money, time, and years of emotional labor, but the truth also freed me. I didn't have to carry the weight of his failures anymore, or his manipulations, or the fantasy I'd built around him. His life was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in years, I could finally see my future without him in it, and it didn't scare me. 2 months after this settlement, the dust finally began to settle. Not dramatically, not all at once more, like the way a storm leaves behind. Silence, the air still heavy but breathable again. I had expected to feel triumphant or bitter or conflicted when everything was finalized. Instead, what I felt was a quiet, steady relief. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't closure, not fully. It was simply the realization that I could finally live without waiting for the next explosion. Anthony made his first repayment on the 15th of the month, $1,350, withdrawn automatically through the court-ordered system. I saw the transfer notification, watched it land in my account, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no surge of vindication. Just neutrality. A mechanical exchange of numbers, representing a debt he owed, a debt he created, and a debt he would carry for the next 4 years. In a way, that absence of feeling was its own kind of healing. I didn't need the payment to feel powerful. I didn't need vengeance. I just needed distance. The house felt different without him. At first, it was unsettling spaces left open, where his things used to be closets that suddenly seemed larger silence that wasn't filled by his restless pacing or defensive explanations. But once I began reclaiming the rooms, the silence became intentional, almost comforting. I took down the decor he insisted matched his aesthetic vision, repainted the bedroom walls, and bought a new couch I actually liked. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a shared life and started feeling like a life that was finally mine. Work also changed. A month after everything ended, I was promoted to a senior operations role. More responsibility, more recognition, and a raise substantial enough to make rebuilding my savings feel possible again. My boss said the promotion had been in discussion for months. I wondered if I would have even accepted it back when I was still exhausted from working extra jobs to support Anthony's store. Now I stepped into the role with clarity and focus I hadn't felt in years. My parents were relieved once I told them the legal battles were over. My dad told me quietly but firmly that he was proud of how I had handled everything, that I stayed rational when it counted, that I didn't let manipulation drag me under. My mom hugged me and whispered, "You deserve someone who builds with you, not on you." For the first time since all of this began, I believed her. Mutual friends reacted predictably. Some had gone quiet during the chaos and remained quiet afterward, embarrassed by the assumptions they had made. Others reached out privately to apologize, saying they had no idea how much I had funded, how many promises Anthony had made, or how much he had twisted the narrative. A few admitted that once the truth about the business expenses got around, their sympathy for him evaporated. They weren't angry at him for failing, everyone fails, but for lying so easily, so convincingly to people who had supported him. His family, on the other hand, stayed loyal to him. His sister refused to speak to me. His mom sent one curt email saying, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. News traveled faster than I expected. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Anthony had moved in with his ex, the same woman he'd been seeing while the business was collapsing. Apparently, several people in their friend circle were distancing themselves from the relationship, either because they felt betrayed by his behavior or because they didn't want to be associated with the drama. People might tolerate failure, but they rarely respect deceit. But none of that mattered to me anymore. Their judgments weren't my responsibility. Anthony's new life wasn't my concern. And his relationship, now built openly instead of in secret hotel rooms, no longer had the power to affect me. I started therapy around that time, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand the deeper wound, the part of me that had tolerated so much for so long. My therapist told me something that stayed with me. The betrayal wasn't just the cheating. It was how he made you question your judgment, your support, your reality. Gaslighting leaves bruises no one else sees. That truth hit harder than any hotel charge ever could. Yes, the affair hurt. Yes, the financial loss stung. But the most painful part was remembering how he had stood in front of me and told me I was unsupportive while using my savings to support someone else. How he portrayed me as the villain when all I ever did was build a safety net for his dream. How he turned my sacrifices into weapons against me. Yet as the weeks passed, I no longer felt consumed by those memories. I was building something new slowly but deliberately. I was reclaiming my time, my space, my sense of self. I even went on a few casual dates. Nothing serious, nothing rushed, just stretching the muscles of possibility again. My therapist said it was normal to feel hesitation, that trust once broken, that deeply takes time to rebuild even in yourself. But there was one thing I did trust: consequences. Every month at exactly 12:01 p.m. on the 15th, $1.350 Oz arrived in my account. Not out of love or remorse or duty, but because a court order required it, because truth had consequences, because accountability, even delayed, was still accountability. Every time that notification appeared, I didn't think of Anthony. I thought of the moment I drew a line that said, I will not be manipulated. I will not be blamed for your failures. I will not lose everything because you refuse to face the truth. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't vindictive. It was simply justice. In the end, justice didn't look like winning everything. It looked like refusing to lose everything. It looked like letting go of a man who used me, rebuilding my life piece by piece, and remembering that loyalty should never cost you your future. Anthony's repayment wasn't closure. It wasn't victory. It was just a reminder